There are still, the Lega Nord is a new Stalinist party in Italy. They organize meetings every week with their supporters. They have people coming from Rome, people coming from the regional parliament, but also from Rome, talking to activists and giving them some help in making sense of processes of change and globalization that are very, very difficult to understand. Where you are in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Veneto, and your village in a couple of years has been completely transformed and radically transformed by arrival of people that you don't understand, and also by the complete change in the economic structure. And they are there to give you an answer. So this was to a large extent the function of the Communist Party on the left in Italy.
To what extent have they got into the old Communist Party support? Or also the culture of the party?
I think what they've been very successful at doing is to really create a new subculture, which in some areas of Italy has replaced the Christian democratic culture. And they are also very, very successful in talking to working class people. And we may like or not what they say, but certainly they do provide an explanation for what's going on. I think that, one of the problems of certainly the Partito Democratico, in my view, is that, yes, if you read what they publish, then there are a lot of interesting things, but is this coming through? Is it coming through to people in the sense of simple, convincing messages that provide some sort of explanation about things like the financial crisis, immigration, globalization, crime, and so on and so forth. The Lega Nord is effective in doing that. To go back to your question, I agree, they are completely different kind of party from Popolo della Libertà. Again, they are very well rooted at the local level. The Popolo della Libertà in many ways is similar to what Christian democracy was, in the sense that it's a container of many different interests. Of course, there are also very many differences, but the Lega Nord is very well rooted, and it's a completely different kind of entity. It's at the moment in an alliance, but again, if you ask them whether they should keep all doors open or whether they feel that they belong to the center-right, great majority of activists would say, no, we don't belong anywhere. We belong to, we want to achieve freedom. And going to what you said about federalism, it's very difficult to explain, and it's very difficult, but the simple idea that the North in general should have more autonomy from Rome is simple. Then, okay, if you go down the path of, can you explain the differences between devolution, federalism? Nobody can do that. But the simple message is, we want more freedom from this political class, from Rome, from centralization. And this is, if you want, it's quite simple. When you want a new motorway in the Veneto region, you want more infrastructure, you want to be in control of your money, the message, gets through.
Coming back to Jim and the previous Berlusconi government, what's different this time round, would you say?
I think that one can compare governments probably in terms of four criteria, I would say. One would be stability, the other would be popularity, the third would be the government's legislative activity, and then fourthly the outcomes of those activities. And I think we can see comparisons and similarities in terms of all four of those criteria. If we take stability first, then I think the current government is actually much more stable than the other one. We have to remember that the other one was actually two governments. It was forced to resign and seek a new term of office after the European elections of 2005 as a result of widespread disappointment that had been provoked by the inability of Berlusconi and his team to sort of square the circle between the promises they'd made in 2001 in relation to massive increases in public spending having to do with the famous contract with the Italian people on the one hand, and the tax cuts on the other. It was a four-party coalition, each of whose members was indispensable for the survival of the government in office. So you had this situation of interlocking vetoes, because if they all wanted change, going in somewhat different directions. Of course, the fact that it was a larger coalition than the present one meant that its ideological span was that much greater, and so that much greater would be the likelihood that those interlocking vetoes would in fact be a realistic would be a real obstacle in the way of effective action on the part of the government. And so the UDC in 2005 was looking for a way of increasing its visibility and its own support in a context in which Berlusconi was obviously unpopular, and so insisted on this reshuffle and so on. Perhaps somewhat less likely that we will see such a scenario this time round. Of course, the Northern League likewise has veto power because it too is indispensable numerically for the survival of the government. But Berlusconi, I think, was rather shrewd when he set the government up, because what he did was to give the Lega Nord far more positions in cabinet and far more important positions than its numbers would otherwise have warranted. So if the Lega is going to decide to break, it has to make a decision about whether it's better off breaking or whether it is better off sticking with a situation which gives it much more influence in cabinet than, as I say, its numbers would otherwise allow it to have. Another factor which makes the government more stable than the previous one is the fact that, Berlusconi being a coalition maker, having unassailable power in his own party, having been elected as the head of a coalition that was directly seeking an absolute majority of seats in Parliament rather than as a coalition which was cobbled together afterwards, means that the consequent greater cohesion of this government enables him to engage in permanent campaigning in a way that he wasn't able to last time round. That is, to use governing as a means of mobilising support, and mobilising support as a means of governing effectively. And I think we can see that in the opinion polls. If you have a look at the opinion polls,